Hello, my name is Bob Tribe and welcome to Valley to Vietnam. Valley to Vietnam is a joint effort between the Sacramento Public Library and the Vietnam Veterans of America Chapter 500. It is our intent to trace the arc of experience between Sacramento and Vietnam for our local Vietnam era vets. Today our guest is Jay Hatch, who was an engineering officer with 101st Airborne in Vietnam. Jay, welcome.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you it's an honor to participate.
Well, thank you so much for coming. We have a lot of people who don't want to be interviewed, and I fully understand. So, okay, to start off, you were born in Arkansas.
Yes, I was. It's 1943.
Yeah.
Up in a dry county called Craighead in Jonesboro, northeastern Arkansas.
Was that close at all to where Bill Clinton was born?
It was it was on the other side of the state, and
Okay.
I was disappointed because Hope, Arkansas used to have a reputation as the watermelon capital of the world.
Oh.
Until Bill Clinton came along.
Yeah. Well, so much for that. But your family moved to San Francisco at some point. How old were you then?
I was about 10. My father worked for the Corps of Engineers, and he had an opportunity for promotion to come to San Francisco, and so I followed the dinner table.
Okay. Was he an engineer also?
He was an engineer also,
Okay.
and that's probably why I went into engineering.
Yeah.
I had a propensity for math.
All right. Well, good for you. I wish I had. I did. Science was okay, but math, and where did you go to school in San Francisco?
I went to graduated from George Washington High School in the Richmond district.
Okay, I know that area.
Father found a nice house out there, which was very close to the Golden Gate Park, and I enjoyed running in the park.
Now, did your family get transferred to Sacramento? Your dad get transferred to Sacramento, or you just went to school here at Sac State?
The Corps of Engineers consolidated some offices, and so his discipline got transferred to Sacramento.
Okay.
And so once I graduated from high school, I came to Sacramento and started going to college at the community college, which was Sacramento City College or junior college.
Known for having some of the best baseball teams in community colleges anywhere. And so you were going to Sac City, and then you went to Sac State?
Went to Sac State, again in engineering, civil engineering, and I had military deferments for about 6 years.
Okay. Yeah, and interestingly enough, you mentioned that you worked as a engineering intern for the Bureau of Reclamation, which I also did. I was
oh, yes, okay.
I was an engineering aide. I don't know if that was equivalent but I worked there 3 summers, so we might have seen each other in the hallway and never.
Or in the break room.
Yeah, there you go. That was a regular at that
I worked
place.
in the hydraulics section, and I was interested. That was one of the classes that I did best in college. I had difficulty with concrete and steel design, but hydraulics and floodplains kind of forecast what I'd be working in for a career.
Well, that's a good thing for California, because that's a very important area, especially now, but going way back then too.
Yes.
So you did that, and then you graduated in 1967 in June, I assume.
Yes.
And so then, did you enlist? Did you get drafted, or?
As I said, I had deferments for 6 years, and so sometime in the beginning of '67, January, February, I got a greetings notice. Come to Oakland.
Right.
And so the family discussed it. My father was in the Army Reserve, and he suggested that life would be better as an officer. And so I went down and discussed the possibility of applying to engineering OCS, and was accepted. So after I graduated, we took a family vacation to Arkansas to visit relatives and do the goodbyes and buy life insurance from an uncle.
Yeah.
And then in July, I again reported to Oakland and was sworn in.
That's interesting. And eventually we're going to talk about Fort Belvoir, but that's where you went to engineering OCS, where my father went in 1942.
Oh, okay.
And you were eventually in the 326th Engineering Battalion, is it?
Yes.
And my father was in the 327th. And they kind of matched. You were in the 101st, my dad was in the 82nd Airborne, and so they kind of paralleled there.
Right up front.
Right. Yeah, there you go. So you're going to go to boot camp where?
I was sent off, actually my first big plane ride was in a jet that went to St. Louis, and then I picked up a DC-3 passenger train to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
I've often heard that referred to as the armpit of Army basic training camps.
It is, and people said it's a little Korea. The ground is so hard you can't drive a tent peg into it until it rains, and then you can't stand on it.
Right. And isn't that kind of an area where once there was a lot of malaria and lots of mosquitoes? I think going way back into the 1800s, you know.
There may have been, you're not too far from the Mississippi River where there's an awful lot of swampland and rice land.
Right, okay. Now, you went to boot camp there. Did you also go to AIT there?
Yes, I did. Just went across the base and engineering, AIT, Advanced Individual Training. I remember probably one of my most enjoyable things was putting together Bailey bridges, because they were like erector sets for crossing a bridge.
Sure.
But yeah, we learned how to do most of the basic pioneering skills in engineering.
Right. My father talked about Bailey bridges all the time. They were using those in World War II.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you finished AIT. You've done, each was 8 weeks then, I take it?
It's about 8 weeks, and so this takes us up to about November. And we had a 2-week break before I had to report to OCS, so I came home. And then actually went down to Travis and took a MAC flight. Instead of buying an airline ticket, I could go down there and sign up, and ended up Trenton, New Jersey, I think, and took Greyhound buses down to Washington, D.C., and eventually Fort Belvoir. You know, I remember these flights where all the military guys would go commercial, but they would be bumped at various locations. And at one point when I was trying to get back to Fort Benning, I was bumped at Dallas, but then they let us back on. I was bumped at Shreveport, and they let us back on. I was bumped at Birmingham, and we slept on the benches all night in the airport. So yeah, that wasn't a fun way to travel. It was precarious, but it was cheap.
Yeah, it was cheap. So what was engineering OCS like?
It was interesting because my class was the first one that had all college graduates. So we had a certain pride to it, but the tactical officers didn't seem to respect that. We were still abused and harassed. The first week we had to do marching maneuvers in our bunk before we could go to sleep.
Right.
And so there was an awful lot of harassment as you went through the 3 stages of OCS. It was a 6-month program. Yeah. So every 2 months you went from you moved up the line until you were a red badge and you're upperclassman. Were
the TAC officers engineering officers?
No, not necessarily. They were just actually OCS graduates from 1, 2, or 3 classes before us.
Yeah. Okay.
But I guess they were good at discipline.
Yeah.
Interestingly, all of my classmates in the OCS were the wide spectrum of disciplines. They weren't engineers. I had teachers, I had a baker, I had lawyers.
Maybe you just had some people who were just very mechanical.
Very mechanical, or a warm body assignment.
Yeah. Well, that's a skill that I'm lacking. But did you have to eat square meals like we did at Benning?
Yes, we did. As a lower classman, you were limited in the food you could intake, and you had to do the bring the fork up and then pull it back and then take a small bite. And the purpose, we were told, was that if you're sitting at the table with the general and he asks you a question, you need to respond quickly. You don't want to make the general wait until you finish chewing and swallow.
Yeah, we were given no reason why we had to sit on the last 4 inches of our chair and not speak and not eyeball and all that sort of thing.
And we had to memorize and recite inane phrases and lists of things that I have no idea what they are now.
Yeah, and the 7th week for us was what they called Hell Week, and they would just really get on you to try to get you to quit. And I remember one time in the mess hall there, I had to stand on top of a table and bend over and twirl my dog tags above my head, but pretending that it was a Huey helicopter. And then there was a guy standing behind me, you know, rotating as he was the tail rotor. And then I had to sing the theme song for the infantry, which was this stupid song.
Yeah, I guess all of this was trying to test you to see if you had self-discipline.
That's true.
Can you take it?
Can you take it?
Or are you going to blow up?
And you would see guys, you know, break down, and they didn't make it through. So
we had a fellow that I thought was going to be the greatest example. He'd gone to prep school, military prep school, and he dropped out after 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's just interesting. We had guys who were recycled. They had gone through 18 weeks of Officer Candidate School, and of course they were going to be seniors then, and then it was a gravy train, and they'd recycle them back to 0 week.
Ooh.
And I said, you know what? We had some of those guys in our company, and I said, if that happens to me, I will be an enlisted man, because I'm not going through any more of this stuff.
Yeah.
It was tough. You know, it was really hard. I mean, I learned discipline, which is not something that I was ever very good at, but I learned to be. And you were out in the field quite a bit in OCS, or what?
Yes. I'd been a Boy Scout, so I enjoyed compass and orienteering, and so
Right.
I volunteered to be the guy that would hold the compass and tell my guide at night which way to go.
Yeah.
Except I'd forgotten some basics about adjusting for
Declination.
and so I led the guys off the wrong way a couple of times.
Well, you wouldn't be too far off, depending where in the country you were.
And it was kind of sad because I had poor night vision, and so I don't know why I was in charge of where we were going.
Yeah, I remember they'd set up those courses they'd say go 700 meters at 63 degrees, and you're going to see a numbered stake, or something larger than a stake, but a post. You have to write down that number, and then from there you're going to go, 46 degrees in a different direction, and they'd run us all over them. But I always thought that was kind of fun and challenging.
It was. There were interesting problems. I remember we had one night maneuver where I was supposed to be in charge of 3 or 4 guys to go through the forest in the night and approach a simulated village and go in and inspect a couple of living quarters and see what was inside of them. And I'd been through the area once before, and so I remembered there was a hiking trail that went over the hill, approaching it. So I took my guys up that way, and lo and behold, we came upon a couple of privates sitting there with a machine gun, waiting for us to enter the village. And I said, you guys have just been captured. I said, how are we going to do this? I don't want to lug that machine gun around. So I said, give me all your ammunition. And so we took all the ammunition so they couldn't shoot at us later,
Right.
and left them. And then we went down to the simulated village, and I see these wires coming down, and I'm thinking, I wonder what these wires are. Well, I'm not supposed to destroy property, so I shouldn't cut them, but they were the ones that were set up to the trip wires
Right.
that set the flares off. And so
Yeah.
we tripped one real quick and then skedaddled, but no machine gun fire because we had the bullets.
Nice job.
And so this is kind of a play, you try to put this in perspective of the next 2 years. It was an interesting exercise, but only in retrospect. I'm not sure we learned a whole lot from it.
Yeah, because once you graduated from Officer Candidate School, then you had a 2-year commitment.
Yes.
So you've got maybe 10 months of training and then another 2 years.
And that's what they had. They took us all into the mess hall and said, sign this paper that says you're resigning as an enlisted individual.
Right.
And at the same time, sign this paper that says you're re-upping for 2 years.
Yeah.
And now you're a lieutenant. And the last 6 months we've told you that you can't make decisions on your own, but now you can.
Yeah, they're not going to be maybe the greatest decisions, but you can make them on your own. So then after you graduated from Officer Candidate School, where'd you go then?
I was assigned to Fort Leonard Wood. Actually, I stayed in Fort Belvoir for another 6 weeks for a quarry course, rock crushers.
Oh.
So we learned about air compressor tools and how to crush rocks.
So this wasn't like a Southern chain gang where people would sing gospel songs.
This was big metal crushers and big rotary. So when I reported into Fort Leonard Wood, I was kind of hoping to get assigned to the lumber or or wood shop, you know, and learn how to build. I kind of wanted to learn how to build houses.
Uh-huh.
But they saw I'd been to the quarry course, and they needed someone down there, so I got assigned to the rock quarry school at Fort Leonard Wood. And that's where they crushed, you know, they would utilize explosives to break up a hillside, bring it down to big rock crushers, which would make it into smaller rocks, segregate it, and then we use that for paving or asphalt contents or pathways around the base.
So somewhat akin to building the railroad across the Sierra Nevada, blowing up a lot of rock.
Yeah, a lot of rock.
Yeah.
It was kind of similar, yeah.
Yeah, I'll be darned. So then you do that, and then from Leonard Wood you went to Vietnam?
Yes, I got assigned to Vietnam, arriving approximately April 1st, which I thought was a big joke.
Which was?
Would be 1969.
Okay, 69.
I was at Fort Leonard Wood for about 6 months, and then then I got the assignment for Vietnam. So I came home for a couple of weeks of R&R and visit the president of my fan club, my girlfriend, and visit the family. And you know, it's kind of a somber time. You know where you're going, and you're trying to be upbeat, but still.
Sure.
There's a heaviness to every encounter.
Yeah. And so from there, leaving your family, you head to Vietnam. And where did you go?
The family drove me down to Travis.
Uh-huh.
And I always say that we got shipped out of the country in the middle of the night because the plane took off at midnight from Travis Air Force Base. That was kind of teary-eyed moment, and
Sure.
hop on a plane with a bunch of other guys in khakis.
Yeah.
And we flew over to Vietnam. It landed in Bien Hoa Airfield.
Okay.
down near Saigon. You're sorted out, and I was assigned to I think it's called the 90th Replacement Battalion.
The Repo Depot.
Repo Depot, yeah. It's warm bodies through the mill, and who needs a person, and here you go.
Sure.
I had an opportunity to take advantage of my father's connections. He said, now when you go over there, I can talk to some of my buddies and get you in a rear area where you can be on a drafting table. And I was insulted. I felt, you know, I'm going to roll the dice and take whatever comes.
Right.
So I did, and I guess the 101st, what I really didn't want to do was be in charge of a rock quarry.
I don't blame you.
What a waste.
Yeah.
The 101st needed a replacement lieutenant for the 326 engineers, and so that's where I was assigned. We had about a week of indoctrination training, and sergeants showing you that you could put an M16 on your chin and fire it without losing teeth.
Can't do that with an M14.
No. So then I was assigned to I Corps, which is the northernmost province or area up near Hue. Went to Camp Eagle, which was the base of the 101st. They'd been there about a year.
Uh-huh.
So when it was time to go, they took us out to the air base or airfield, and lined you up with all the other guys that are going north, and everybody climbed in the back of a C-130, I believe it was, with the door that opens up in the back. And you're told to move forward, sit down, or turn around, sit down, spread your legs, and the next guy's sitting in your lap. And the next guy'd sit in his lap. And so
Right.
we were all crammed in there like that with your duffel bags.
Now, what month was this?
This would have been April.
Okay. Now, wasn't Hamburger Hill about a month later?
Hamburger Hill was a month later, and I was on a fire base across the A Shau Valley from Hamburger Hill.
Uh-huh.
Didn't know the significance of it at the time, but I heard people talking about it. Yes, that was in May
Right.
of '69.
A lot of 101st guys were killed.
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot of people. Yeah.
So your job, did you have the same job the whole time as far as road building? And
Yes, I did. I was assigned as a platoon leader of a light equipment platoon,
uh-huh.
about 30, 40 people. They would have, we had small bulldozers which could be transported by helicopter without disassembling them.
Oh gosh.
Deuce and a half, some trucks, some graders, Pentaprime tank trucks that would oil the roads.
Uh-huh.
And I quickly found out that I really didn't know what was going on, but the sergeants did.
Yeah.
And so the thing I really learned was that the sergeants run the Army, and
It's true.
and the officers can take the blame if something goes wrong.
And your primary mission was to flatten mountaintops where you could put in artillery installations.
Yes, what people mostly hear about are the troops that are in contact with the enemy or on patrols in the jungle.
Uh-huh.
In order to protect them, they would try to set up an artillery fire base that could give them support if they came in contact. And someone had to build the fire base, and so our job was to either rappel some pioneer engineers into the top of a hill, and either using explosives or chainsaws knock down the trees.
Uh-huh.
And then we would bring in one of our bulldozers and continue to grade the surface until it was flat enough. Occasionally the Army or the Air Force would bring in 1,000-pounders and drop them on the hill, and that would assist in getting in the initial spot. So the artillery, it would take 3 or 4 days to set up a base where artillery could come in with 105s and 155s, and they would be able to support the infantry that were in the jungle around us.
Now, while you're building these things, did you have any infantry kind of supporting you?
Yes, we did. Yeah,
Okay.
and but there were a couple of conflicts sometimes when an infantry officer felt like the engineers that were working all day needed to pull guard duty at night. And I remember a captain says, "No, we're not." And he says, "Yes, you are." And he says, "I'm sending helicopters for my people. They'll sleep at home and then come back tomorrow."
Yeah.
It was interesting, power structures there.
Sure. Now you did this from April to about somewhere in the fall, I remember.
In August, yeah, we did. We opened up 6 or 7 different fire bases all over the I-Corps. Some overlooking the A Shau Valley. We also did some public service type projects. We would assist with road building or bridge repair for local communities, in order so that people could get to the market.
Yeah.
And so we had a couple of opportunities to get out among the people.
Community action projects.
Community action, that's it.
Yeah.
That's put it a good way.
Right, the military way.
And also got a nice tour of Hue one time. They had an all-day tour. We went in and toured both the Citadel and some pagodas, and saw a lot of how people lived in the Perfume River in a boat. The boat was a complete, the only thing they owned. So that was an eye-opener for the way, a different way of living.
And Hue, a little over a year prior to that, was the center of heavy combat.
Yes.
Mostly between the Marines, but also the Army.
Yes, yeah, it was.
During Tet.
The Tet Offensive of '68.
That was covered pretty closely in the news here, and then also with the movie Full Metal Jacket, that centered on Hue. So, now we talked earlier about you losing one of your men. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, that was I was only been in country about 30 days. And so I was kind of learning my responsibilities. Been on a couple of fire bases, and had a young man from Kansas who was from a farm community, and I decided I was going to make him one of my first recipients of an order. He had been in country 5 or 6 months, and so I was pretty green.
Yeah.
And I tried to encourage him to put some boot polish on his boots because they were brown and the water was soaking into them. I said, you don't have to spit shine them, but it would be good if you put some polish on them just to waterproof them. And he said, no, can't do that because then I look like a newbie. I got to keep my brown shoes so people know I've been here for a while.
Right.
So that was a little test of wills, and I backed off. I said, okay, you know, this is not worth fighting.
If you want trench foot, that's your problem.
Yeah. But he was a great dozer operator, and he could level a fire base and back a dozer up a hill that I didn't want to walk up.
Right.
I was really afraid I was going to lose him from just toppling. So he was. We just had standoffs on how things were done. He was a little bit disrespectful or impudent, but he was a good operator, so I had to balance how I worked with him. So he was on a fire base with me and 2 or 3 other guys on a fire base that had already been activated, and they were doing fire control missions. And so as a Green Lieutenant, I didn't know how to protect my men. I also didn't like to tell people what to do. That's just my nature, especially if I second guess myself and try to decide, well, is this really right, or is there an alternative? So in the evening, everybody dispersed around the fire base and the artillery pieces to find their own sleeping positions, wherever you want to sleep. We didn't go inside of sandbag areas or hooches. About 4 in the morning, I could hear a thump, thump, thump. Mortars. The fire base had been targeted, and they were walking mortars down the length of the fire base, dropping them. Thump, thump, thump. And I heard guys in fighting position screaming and yelling because one had landed right on top of them. And so I didn't do the John Wayne thing, stand up and run with my gun. I snuck sideways as low to the ground as I could until I got into a trench. Put my glasses on, my boots. And then people started coming out because no one tried to invade the compound. So when the sun came up, and it was rather foggy, there were some body bags already lined up on the helicopter pad. And I thought, oh, this is the reality of what we're doing, isn't it? But there were no faces. They were just body bags.
Right.
Then I found out that this dozer operator, the one that wouldn't put shoe polish on his boots, was unconscious. He had been, a mortar had landed very close to where he was sleeping, and so the concussion put him unconscious. And you know, in the Army, you're supposed to be rather stoic and not show much emotion, but this was one of my men.
Right. And
I was responsible for him. So I'm trying to figure out what we're going to do. And they're bringing in, trying to get a Medevac chopper in. But there's fog everywhere, and none of the Medevac helicopters could come in. It was too dangerous. Till finally one unit, way over on the coast, said, we'll do it. And so we had a signalman there on the base, and he brought the helicopter in. I could not see it until it got down to 20 feet.
Oh, jeez.
And it landed, and all this time I'm talking to my man, telling him, you're going to be okay. Things are going to be okay. Just hang in there. We're going to get you out of here. Hold, you know, what else can you say? Loaded him up, and the helicopter flew out. And I stayed there for another 3 days before we were returned, before we could actually transport out too, because of the fog. I think the body bags stay there because.
Yeah.
So that was a constant reminder. There was the water blivets and the fuel blivets were all punctured, and there were fluids all over the place. So we continued our job and did our job for the 2 or 3 days until we got back. And then I found out that he had died in the hospital. And it hit me kind of hard, and I had a lot of self-evaluation, like, was I a good lieutenant? I asked the question, did I do everything I could have to have protected him? Was there something I should have done?
Right.
And I was thinking, you know, you were rather ignorant of war and what it took. Go easy on yourself. I said, yeah, but he was my responsibility. And so we had a memorial ceremony there in the camp. It turned out to be Memorial Day, you know, with the boots and the upturned rifle.
Right.
As I'm walking back to my hooch, I'm really feeling guilty, like I've got a stain on me. Everybody's looking at me that you lost one of your men. So it kind of bothered me for a long time. I collected some money from his co-workers or his troops, and we gathered down $100, and I was going to send it off to his family. Before I could do it, I was wounded myself, and so I brought the money back to the States with me, and eventually wrote a letter to the family. Said this is, you know, tribute from his co-workers, and I'm sorry for your loss. And again, still feeling the guilt of I lost one of my men.
Sure.
I always thought that the mission came first, but I didn't like that idea because I thought, you know, you run out of men and you can't do a mission, so I really need to.
But that's what's drilled into you.
Yeah.
Mission first, period.
Yeah.
You know. But as everybody knows, when you're in combat and you get so close to your men, this is really hard. I don't know how many lieutenants I've talked to who still grieve over guys in their platoons that they lost. So I know that wasn't easy, Jay, so thank you for talking about that. But let's talk a little about when you were wounded.
Oh, okay. Well, yep. I got to thinking about this interview, and everybody says, well, were you scared when you were in Vietnam? And there were only 2 times I was scared. It was the first 2 or 3 nights when you're in country and you hear bombs and mortars going off outside the cantonment, and you look above you and you see that there's not much roof to protect you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had trouble sleeping the first 2 or 3 nights. After that, you come to some resignation that you say, well, I've just got to get through this at a day at a time, and I can't be going around fearful all the time. I got to do my job. And the next time I was scared was, I'm jumping ahead, was when I was medevaced to Japan, and they took us from the bus to the hospital through traffic lights. And I thought, oh, this is civilization. But, oh wait, what if they fix me up and send me back?
Ah.
And I was scared. It was only 2 times I think I was scared over there, really.
Right.
So how did I get wounded? We were assigned to do a pioneer road, which is like a dirt road through the jungle, in order to provide supply access to a fire base that had already been built. And it was going to be about a 2-week job. And so I was one of the officers assisting on that, even though, as I said, the sergeants knew what to do. And I was just a perfunctory head.
Right.
So we've been out 4 or 5 days, and the road was through the jungle about 5-7 miles, I guess it was. And we would knock down the trees with D8 Rome plows or explosives or chainsaws. Again, trying to push a road through the jungle. And but once you got to the end of the road or the end of the day, we came back to our own cantonment area, which was our defensive position at the beginning of the road. And so that left a dirt road accessible to whoever wanted to put a mine in it overnight as a greeting for the next day. So every day you'd have to have the minesweepers come out, and they'd have to walk the 5 miles with the minesweepers teams to make sure there weren't any mines. And so my job this day was, as the only lieutenant, to go along in a Jeep and make sure things were going okay near the end of the road.
Uh-huh.
So I arrived at the end of the road at about the same time the minesweepers were finishing up. Got out of the Jeep, carried my M16. I thought I'd go up and see how they were doing. And the next thing I knew, I was falling over as a result of an explosive from behind me. I was told later they think it was a B-40 or a rocket-propelled grenade that had been lobbed down at, well, the Jeep, because that's the guy in charge, or the guy that's got a 45 on his hip. He must be in charge. Let's shoot him.
Sure.
So I'm falling over, and later I realized that what I was thinking at the time was that I'd been carrying, I was embarrassed because I felt like I'd been carrying a dozen eggs for 5 months, and now I dropped them.
Right.
And so next thing I knew, I was reciting, I was laying on the ground face down, and I was reciting my best friend's mailing address in San Francisco. Why? I don't know. But I said, oh, if you remember that, then you must be alive.
Right.
And I was spitting out teeth and blood into the dirt.
So
and then
you were hitting the right side of your face.
I was hitting the right side through and through, and a couple of other shrapnel spots, but that was a major one. Later you start thinking about what ifs, and you think, well, let's see, there's a jugular here, and there's a brain here, so maybe losing 3 teeth wasn't so bad.
Right.
So I'm laying there, and I'm thinking, oh, in all the movies they say, don't move because they'll shoot you again. And so I tried to hold my breath as long as I could until our other security, the Arvins, the South Vietnamese Army, had tanks, and they were giving us protection, so they came up. And when they came up, I wiggled my fingers just a little bit like this, hoping no one would see it but them, and so they started yelling, and some guys came over and dragged me off the road back over to where everybody was.
And did you get Medevac right away, or?
Yes, and that's another, what I think is a good story, because they pulled me back past the tanks, and there was a chopper coming out with my company commander, and actually I rode back in that one instead of him. I later found out that he was coming out to let me know that I was being brought back to the rear area, and I was going to be the new supply officer for the battalion.
Right.
And I recall that when you have to inventory everything and sign for everything, and then when you leave you have to inventory it again, and if there's something missing, it's yours.
Yeah.
And so in some ways I think losing 3 teeth might have been a good trade for not being the supply officer for a battalion.
On the other hand, most lieutenants were out in the field for 6 months, and then, in support for 6 months.
Yeah.
So you just about reached that point.
I just about
in
reached
time.
that point.
Yeah. So,
but I didn't get my R&R.
oh, that's true.
So this helicopter brought me back to our first aid station at the at Camp Eagle, and I was still ambulatory, and they walked me over to another one that took me to the next level of triage. And by then I was getting a little weak, and so then they took me on a helicopter down to Cameron Bay, where the major hospitalization was. And I really felt bad because there was a fellow who was going on R&R, and he was in his khakis, and I was bleeding all over him.
Jeez.
I felt sad for him.
Yeah. Well, that's very good-hearted of you. So how long were you at? How long total hospitalization with this one?
It was about 2 weeks. I had about 3 days there in Vietnam. They sewed up the wound, and then 3 days later we were medevac to Japan, Camp Zama, and I was there for 2 weeks while they made sure things were okay and treated other little minor wounds.
Right. And then from Japan, you went back to the States then?
Came back to the States. I did a phone call. It's one of those ham radio type phone calls.
Okay.
Over,
Yeah.
and type stuff. So I called the family. I'd already written them a note and told them that I was okay. And then on the phone I started telling, well, then I got a spot on my knee, and I got a spot on my butt, and then I got a spot. And they go, what? So I don't think I comforted very much by a phone call.
Right.
So when I left the hospital there, I had to sign out, and they said, well, you owe $5.75 for meals. And I said, what? So I paid my $5.75 for meals as an officer, because they weren't provided, you had to pay for them.
Yeah.
And they said, now you can buy a uniform if you want to come home in a uniform. And I said, I'll go home in pajamas, I'm not going. So I came to the Leonard, Travis, and then helicoptered from there over to Letterman Hospital in the Presidio.
And how long were you at Letterman?
I was there for about a week. Actually, the family came down a couple of days later and brought me some clothes. And they said I was ambulatory and doing okay, so I could go home for a week and then come back for a week. So I actually got to go home and recuperate there, and then came back and did the final tests and interviews. And then luckily, it said, I still had 6 months left.
Uh-huh.
Where would you like to go? And I said, well, there's an engineering district that my father works at in Sacramento. That would be a nice assignment. I don't want to go in the field again.
Yeah.
And so the request was actually granted. So I came in as a civil engineer.
Oh, okay. For the Corps.
For the Corps of Engineers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. And that's where you ended up working for
Yes.
most of your career? Or?
I've been working for the Bureau of Reclamation, but so I did my last 6 months with the Corps of Engineers,
Uh-huh.
and I was about ready to transfer back to the Bureau, but they're both federal agencies, and they just did a transfer because the floodplain management section that I was working in as an officer was expanding, and they said, you know, we'll give you the same grade and actually promote you sooner than you would if you went back. And so,
Okay.
so I just did a transfer between organizations and continue to work for the Corps of Engineers for another 30 years.
Oh, okay.
So it worked out nice.
Now, you included in your questionnaire some sort of final thoughts about Vietnam. Do you want to talk about that at all, or it's up to you?
Yeah, well, two things. You were talking about in general comments. Some of my thoughts were that I was a little disappointed in the way the media, movies, and the newspaper depicted Vietnam veterans.
Uh-huh.
I was a little saddened because they made some movies about post-traumatic stress disorder, which we didn't know about what it was at the time. And they were sympathetic movies, but the experiences that I had and the guys that I knew weren't represented in the movies, because most of those guys, what I know, guys had their service time and they came home and they put it aside and they went back to civilian life and were productive.
Right.
And that's what I tried to do, was to put things away and go on with a civilian career. Saying like it was just a bump in the road, or as some people would say, an automobile accident. And you don't hear a lot of people bragging about automobile accidents, so
Sure.
just something that happened to you.
Right.
So I was a little disappointed in that. I also felt a little sad because I would read Army magazines about units, military units that were returning to the States. There was a reserve unit from the Bay Area. I think it might have been part of the 101st Airborne also. And they were given a street parade. And I was happy for them, but at the same time I was a little envious because I snuck back into the country in pajamas,
Yeah.
going to a medical hospital. And I appreciate the medical treatment that was given. It was quick, it was thorough, and I've been supported since then by the VA. But I felt, since I didn't go over with a unit that I'd trained with, I was just a replacement body.
Right.
I didn't have the connections with the people I worked with.
Sure.
And so when I came home alone again.
So those initial units, like one of the Marine divisions, probably the 1st Cav, I think even the 4th Infantry
Mhm.
Division, all kind of went over initially as a group, and then after that it was just replacements.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've got friends that went over in '65 with the Marines, and he's had reunions with his buddies,
Uh-huh.
and they've been significant. They've been nice, and so
Right.
I really didn't have anybody that to connect with after I got back home.
Any other thoughts?
Well, the last thought was again about the fellow I lost. You know,
Yeah.
that bothered me for quite a few years, trying to figure out how guilty or responsible I should have been, because he had 55,000 deaths, and I couldn't be responsible for all of them, but
Right.
I felt a connection to one of them. And so I wrote to the family and got a nice letter back from the mother. And so I felt like, okay, I did what I was, the best I could at the time, you know, with what I knew. Later I remembered every year Memorial Day and Veterans Day. I tried to remember this guy because he kind of came to encapsulate or everything I really experienced about Vietnam. So I remembered him for quite a few years. Had a couple of children. I got married, had a couple of children, and we went to Washington, D.C. It was after the Vietnam Memorial, or the wall, had been built.
Right.
And I said, I didn't contribute to its building. I was ambivalent about supporting veterans' causes because I thought a lot of people had used the veterans' name as a way to get things that maybe they didn't deserve, or sympathy. So I was rather stoic, but I thought, I got to go over and find my man's name on the wall. I just got to do it.
Right.
And so we were walking over there, and I was really concerned about how I was going to react because I usually don't get excited about anything. But as we started walking down the path to locate his name, my daughter says, "Mommy, why is Dad crying?" And it took me a while, just like now, to say that this guy didn't have a chance to have children like you.
Yeah. That's tough. I know I've been to the wall a few times, and I see my old friends there. And I go to the wall here at Capitol Park for the California veterans who were killed. I mean, almost 10% of the veterans killed in the war were from California. 150 from Sacramento, and then when you throw in the surrounding communities like Orangevale and Roseville and all that, you get 200. One of the saddest things I've seen is there's two brothers there who were killed a year apart from one another. They were both 20 years old when they were killed. But you and I will never forget those guys, and as you say, they'll be remembered, maybe by our kids too.
So for the wall itself, I wrote a little story one time, and I thought that each of us veterans goes to the wall and brings and leaves what he feels like, and takes away what he needs.
Right. Well, Jay, I just want to thank you so much for coming in today. Welcome home.
Well, thank you.
And I'm real proud of you.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you, Bob.
For your service and for today.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
That concludes our time on Valley to Vietnam. I'd like to thank Jay for his trip down here and his openness about his feelings and his experiences. I say welcome home to him and to all our veterans. For Valley to Vietnam, producer Jerry Ward and director James Scott, I'm Bob Tribe saying we'll see you next time.